Welcome, everyone. We are here to report back from the National Bike Summit. Emma, our admin coordinator, and myself were representing MassBike, who were leading up the delegation from Massachusetts. We had advocates from across the state come on down with us. And we just got back. Well, I got back yesterday. Emma just got back last week, but it was a whirlwind of a week. And we are proud to bring you some news of what's going on down in DC. Before I begin, I will mention that this is part of our monthly webinar series here at MassBike. The goal is to engage advocates from across the state, let you know what's going on in our neck of the woods at MassBike, but then also to help you in your local advocacy. And this month is particularly exciting because not only are we talking about Massachusetts, but we went down to DC to connect with advocates from across the country. And we had some neat tips and tricks that we're bringing back to inspire us in our work locally. And also, we are going to report back that we have some awesome champions down in DC and our congressional leaders. And we are the #1 bike-friendly state in the country for a reason. And I hope that this is an inspiring presentation for you. I'll start by mentioning the first photos on this opening slide. On the very left, that is us in Rep. Trahan's office and the lobby crew there. The middle is Vivian Ortiz, the People's Bike Mayor of Boston. And she is on a group ride there on Pennsylvania Avenue, and you can see the Capitol in the background. And on the right is me as Executive Director of MassBike, but also with friend and former advocate, but now turned Mass DOT and FHWA insider, Jackie DeWolf. So kind of give you a little flavor of the lobbying, the social rides, and the connections that were happening down there when we were in the district. So what is the National Bike Summit? This happens every single year. The League of American Bicyclists, which is our nationwide advocacy organization, they bring down advocates from across the country, typically around mid-March, to meet, to connect, to gather. We have workshops, we have sessions, and then we also, if you are able to, lobby our congressional partners to make specific asks. I love this picture. This is us on the left with our whole MA delegation, just kind of getting into it. And then on the right there, Emma as our statewide coordinator, running through how we're gonna go through lobby day, making sure that all the cats are herded. So I'll give you a little flavor of what happens when we head down to DC. The League of American Bicyclists hosts plenary sessions and workshops. So we'll go through a little bit of what we saw in the breakout sessions, the mobile workshops, and the plenaries. We'll also talk a little bit about Lobby Day, and then we'll round out today's session by mentioning ways in which you as advocates can connect with federal work, specifically around getting dollars for your local efforts. The first day of the summit was jam-packed with information. We had plenary sessions from insiders. My favorite was the advice from the Advocacy panel. And those are advocates turned into bureaucrats to give us some highlights and some tips of what happens once you go from the outside to the inside, or vice versa. We also had Administrator Bott from the Federal Highway Administration talking about some of the active transportation work that FHWA is unveiling, including a $45 million grant program specific for active transportation for biking and walking. And then we had some social workshops for inspiration, including bicycling nomad Eric Cadeno, who was talking about how he journeys by bike, how he has his bike touring inspiration. He followed the path of the Underground Railroad, and he also followed the path of the Buffalo Soldiers, dating back to history, connecting some of the historical biking with what's going on in today's world. And from a personal perspective, I really appreciated all of these plenary sessions because some went into the very weeds, some were high-level tips and suggestions, some were peeks behind the curtain to let you know what's going on in DC, and some were ways of inspiring folks of really keeping the work alive and connecting history to today's efforts. The very first, the advice to the advocates. We were really focusing on how does advocacy and bureaucracy overlap. So some small tips to mention, things that we took away, and Emma, please jump in here as well, or anybody else who was actually there, either virtually or in person. But some tips that we want to highlight for you. Coming from the inside, what we hear really helps them get their projects going. Now, I should mention that this was a lot of friends talking to friends, including Jackie DeWolf, who's down there in the middle. She's actually from MassDOT, but was a colleague of mine back in the Boston University days. So we go way back. She was also the head of Livable Streets Alliance and their first executive director for about 8 years, I want to say. And now she is working both at MassDOT and FHWA. And a couple things that Jackie recommends that we do is stick with a project all the way through the end and beyond. It's not good enough to just ask for a project to be funded or designed or constructed. And then once you have a ribbon cutting, that's not the end of it. You also have to follow through and prove the efficacy of how a bike lane or a trail project is really improving your local community. And whether that's through an economic study, whether that's through following up with personal tales, whether that's bike month events that you might host that feature and highlight that particular infrastructure. It's incredibly beneficial to get back to the project team, to the elected officials who unlocked dollars, to the advocates who were really pushing for it and maybe put their neck out on the line for a contentious project, to show the benefits of what we do. So it's important to keep in mind that once a project is out there and completed, the task of advocates are not done, and you really do need to push forward. Also underscored there is to keep up with the political process. Veronica Davis, who's down in Houston, who wrote an awesome book about inclusive transportation. One of the main highlights that I'd recommend is some of the bibliography that we came away with from being down in the summit. But Veronica Davis was mentioning that it is also very important to not just work at the grassroots, to work at the very top and make sure that you are electing the right people. She has recently left her position in Houston, where she was hugely instrumental in terms of changing the culture there. And she was actually part of the Public Utilities Office, which is how they were able to work with curb management and streetscape. But she has politely been asked to move on by their mayor. And so I think one of the takeaways that she was suggesting is that it's important to get the right mayor. It's important to get the right governor. It's important to get the right congressperson in place in order to have those top-down policies really make the impact where they matter most at your local level. So keep at it, and it's important to go and vote. It's important to go and work with your elected officials, which was also important for us when we are hearing that as we're down there to meet with our congresspeople to make sure that our congresspeople are also on the same page as us. Also, we want to keep in mind that every interaction with your elected officials, with your project managers, doesn't necessarily need to be a transactional ask. It's about relationship building. It's about getting to know them. Go to the happy hours, go to the meetings where you might not necessarily need to be front and center as an advocate, but really start to build those relationships. You're going to see these people in the supermarket. You're going to see these people out on the streets. Build that personal ask. These are people who get to make decisions, and it's important to know that they are not autonomous. They are not beheld to advocates. And so there's a real sense of persuasion that takes place by having them understand the humanity and the personhood behind things. And so that's really kind of be mindful of that. And additionally helpful, some takeaways from this plenary session of what is not helpful. And there's, again, the advocates turned into bureaucrats. The idea of leapfrogging over a system that is already in place. Bureaucracy exists for a reason. If you are attempting as an advocate to leapfrog over that bureaucracy, you can really cause jams in the system. You can really block the flows. So understanding how a system works so that you can work with it will help you in your quest to get to the end goal, whether that's funding, whether that's a project, whether that's a policy decision. follow the process and don't just leapfrog. You may have a connection with your mayor, you may have a connection with your elected official, but they want to make sure that the processes are followed. So please keep that in mind. And then also flip the script a bit. Not everything needs to be a transaction from you asking. Why don't you offer? As an advocate, you are coming with resources. How can you help? What are they sensing that you might not be aware of? Where can you step in with your power, with your network, with your group or your newsletter or your event? How can you shine a little light on something that is essential for them and make sure that their lives can be a little easier? Because again, we're all trying to get to the same end goal of a better society, a more welcoming, a more just place. And so making sure that you are offering and not just asking also helps build that relationship. It was a great session, and I got to admit that I learned a lot from hearing from both the federal, the state, and the municipal level of what is happening behind the scenes. And we have a really good vantage point from advocates, but we really do want to keep in mind of what's going on behind the curtain. Jump ahead here. Great. An additional plenary session, which kind of rounded out the whole summit, the whole 3-day summit, was a very inspiring talk with Eric Cadeno. Now, Eric is a bicycle tourist. He's a storyteller, he's a father, he's a historian, and he is following literally in the path of historical bicyclists or travelers that have a social justice or kind of a culturally minded pursuit. He had followed the Underground Railroad, which I'm sure you're all familiar is how Black slaves were escaping from the South to the North to get freedom back in the days of slavery. But then it was also kind of where the Great Migration was also happening about 150 years ago. So what Eric has done is literally retrace from the historical record the course of going across parts of the country. It's incredibly fascinating to follow the diaries and the day-to-day travels that were going on, and then to connect it to the real world of today. He also followed what were known as the Buffalo Soldiers, which was an expedition of the Bicycle Corps of soldiers who were down in Cuba, but then went out to the Great American West to do the explorations when the Union Army was expanding out in the 1890s as arguably the West was being, for lack of a better term, taken and created into territories that were becoming part of the United States. The bicycle was one of the primary tools in which the soldiers were actually making their way across the Great American West. They traversed the Continental Divide, and they went across basically from Nebraska all the way through Montana, from Missoula and into Yellowstone and Wyoming. Eric has connected his history as a Black man in America, traveling through what could be unfriendly or unfamiliar territory. But the stories that he came out with were really heartwarming and welcoming, and the engagement that he found as he would travel from city to city and town to town were very inspirational, especially for somebody who has been on bicycle tours like myself. It really did make me want to connect not just my current day in the 21st century, but how would it have been back in the 1890s to be a full explorer back when, not for nothing, the bicycle is almost the exact same bicycle as you're riding today. But to know that you're not riding on tarmac, you're not riding on roads, but you're going across what would have been dirt paths, carts, or wagon trails across the Great American West. Some takeaways that we have from that plenary session as well is that he is doing this in light of kind of having a young son and having a family. And being a new father has opened up his eyes as to why he wants to tell the story. He really wants to tell this for the next generation and to inspire that exploration, inspire that pursuit, and inspire that connectivity of knitting together the country for the sake of creating a more unified community so that he can leave this with his son and to always be leading with that sense of exploration. There's always more to discover about society, and to travel at 12 miles an hour with every pedal stroke in this kind of sense of humanity. It really was to me personally, really inspiring, and I want to pack my panniers and get out and go explore. And so I was really appreciative for Eric to lead this talk. And I'll just mention one cool thing too is that bottom photo of him pointing up there. He had found through the National Archives the photographic journey of the soldiers as they were making their 1896 and 1897 explorations and expeditions in Montana and Wyoming. And he came across an image from Livingston, Montana from 1896. Those buildings are still there on Main Street down there. And he found the photographer who had digitized the original silver print and found the photographer by happenstance who was a friend at a coffee shop in Livingston as he was just passing through. And they were able to recreate the image from 1896. And it's a little hard to see based on how we have it on the slide, but there's Eric pointing up to himself. He's the right image on that slide, and the left image is actually one of the soldiers from 1896 in that exact same pose, in that exact same position, with that exact same spot in the back there. So it was really cool to kind of get that sense of living history and carrying that forward to today. Cool. So what else did we see at the summit? I'm going to pass it off to our administrative coordinator, Emma Walter, who was down there with me at sessions.
Hello, everyone. So as Galen said, there were some great sessions that we attended. These are just a few that I attended that I just wanted to share some brief highlights. So one of them was called Community First. It was about building representation in cycling and culture. And then we had some representatives from the major Taylor organizations. So they have an international cycling alliance, which is really cool. They do have ties all over the world, and they're really focusing on trying to help clubs come together and to connect and to learn about advocacy. And they do large group rides and sometimes races. So it's a really great opportunity for, especially people of color, cyclists of color, to be able to find each other and to see each other and see that representation all over the world. They also are starting a kids program, which is very cool. So this was presented by Cherise Stevens, who kind of runs the Major Taylor Kids organization, and this can be duplicated in any community. So they have kind of created the framework for how to create this type of programming for kids in your community. So it would be free for kids. It provides access to bikes and gear and kind of anything the kids would need. They have all the resources on their website, and you can always connect with Cherise. And they employ, people that are LCI trained and coaches that are passionate and can connect and share resources with kids. Because really that's what they really emphasized at the end of the day was, inspiring these kids and connecting with them. The third part of this presentation was by Araceli Newman, and it was called Chicas en Bicicletas, and it was this community program that was created in Fort Collins that was really, I think the important thing about this was that it was very community-led. They didn't, so Lauren and Araceli came in and, they work with the city, but the community actually asked for this and wanted this, and led, the programming and the structure of the programming. So it was presented in English and in Spanish, which was really cool. It was much more of a conversation than a presentation. And it highlighted, the importance of having two languages whenever you're presenting in your community, to highlight language justice and really focus on the community needs, especially in Fort Collins, which has a really high Spanish-speaking population. And one of the other things they highlighted was, when you're doing these community-led programs, it's really important to find the right partners. So in their case, they found partnerships with city departments, with local bicycling-focused businesses, and advocacy organizations. So I really enjoyed this talk. I found it really inspiring, and I'd love to see specifically Major Taylor, since we have that link in Worcester, to really see that be built out for kids. The other session that I went to in the afternoon was called Slow Roads, and it was called an unconference because they really wanted to kind of break down the structure of what a conference is, a formal presentation. It was presented by two members of the League of American Bicyclists on the staff, Anna Tang and Jamil Madafari, and we basically so in our group, we voted on what we wanted to discuss. So there were kind of four areas of discussion: road design, advocacy and education, enforcement, and socializing and communication. We didn't get to all of them, but these are the two that we really focused on, which was road design and socializing and communicating. And I just highlighted a couple of the main takeaways that we got from this. So for road design, there was a focus on, or there was a mention of designing for max volume and not for max volume of vehicles. So trying to reframe, how our roads are being designed, and focusing not so much on trying to make sure all of the cars can get in at, peak rush hour. Someone brought up how bike valet can be a viable option to combat parking limitations, especially for big events. A lot of representatives were mentioning how, that's one of their biggest hurdles, is when they want to do these open streets events, which are great for the community. They find that people fight back because their concerns are that there'll be parking limitations, but offering bike valet is a way to combat that. There was also discussion of self-enforcing, which wasn't clearly defined. I think it's something that the Rhode Island team, particularly Newport, is trying to suss out, but it's this idea of building infrastructure that kind of gets people to move slower, drive slower. If there's a like with speed limits and with like curbs that kind of force you to take a slower turn. And how we can communicate that to our local engineers. And then finally, for socializing and communicating, that was the other big discussion area that we covered. So there were a couple of issues that were brought up. So one was how to spread the message beyond your engaged audience. A lot of organizations were struggling with that, especially particularly small organizations. Another was how this kind of rhetoric of war on cars is becoming really contentious in their communities, because a lot of people feel really strongly that that's not language you should be using, and some people who hear that language get really defensive. Another issue that was brought up was road diets, and kind of dealing with this misinformation and about the infrastructure of getting that message out of what a road diet is. And actually, someone brought up that we shouldn't even been using the term road diet, because that can be kind of seen as limiting and kind of taking things away. So that was sort of an interesting term that I hadn't heard of, and it was enlightening to point out that, yeah, that does kind of sound like you're taking things away from the community, and that's not what we were going for. Someone had a great idea of creating a media toolkit. So kind of creating, and I think actually someone in the presentation did have one, so I might reach out to them and see what they have. But it's a kind of way to provide a like a framework for reporters and media professionals to have the language to talk about these things in the way that we want them to be portrayed in the news, because a lot of times, like again, we are dealing with misinformation about things. And so it was a cool idea. They basically had a breakfast, invited media professionals and reporters to share ideas and discuss how these things can be portrayed in a more kind of in a more descriptive, better way. And then finally, as we mentioned earlier, another thing that was really highlighted was to continue to celebrate local wins, continue to celebrate these projects that get funded all the way through. There was a really inspiring story that that two individuals from Arkansas shared, where, they created this this open streets pop-up event in this street in this area in Arkansas that was really kind of desolate, didn't have a lot going on, no one really visited it, and they did this event, and a lot of people came, and it kind of really gave it some life, and now it's a more vibrant destination in town. And actually, one of the individuals said that he has found employment there. He works at this restaurant now that has bought some storefronts there. So, that was just a really inspiring example of how, coming back and celebrating these communities and these projects have actually brought a lot of prosperity. Yeah.
Great. And then along with the plenary sessions, the breakouts, and the unconferencings, we also had some mobile workshops at the summit. One that I went to, which I really appreciated, was using the AARP Bike Audit Toolkit. This is a toolkit that is provided by the Bike League and AARP. It's a 32-page booklet that basically has a checklist for you to perform analysis of your community, of your neighborhood, that is supposed to be influential wherever you can use it. So it's kind of a self-directed, self-inspired, but the idea there is that you don't need to recreate the wheel. And they have examples of infrastructure that you should be looking for, examples of infrastructure that might be missing. And the idea here is not necessarily this is for older adults, even though it's AARP presented, but that when bicycling infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure is improved or added to a street, it slows down traffic and makes the streets safe for all vulnerable road users, including older adults specifically. This is a really cool toolkit. We'll follow up by throwing a link in the chat. Yeah, 1 second, Alexis. And the idea here is that we want you to do this. We want you as MassBike, we want you as the league, we want you as AARP to do the analysis in your community and then report back. Now, one of the challenges here is that there's no real reporting mechanism. So one ask here is, if you are going to perform an audit, please check in with us. Please let us know, because we want to know what communities have done this. It's very new. It's only been out for about 6 months or so. So this was kind of the inaugural presentation of it. But I really do appreciate that this is a tool that is for local advocates on whatever level to do what they need to do in their own community. So we have the toolkit down there. This is us on the walk audit here, and then an example of some of the cool infrastructure in Washington, D.C., including a curb separated bike lane with both flex posts and concrete curbs. But then also you can kind of see it's leading to a floating bus stop. So in order to not have the conflict of buses pulling into the bike lane, here's an example of by adding a slight raise to the course of where the bicyclists are going. This is a temporary fix too. It's kind of hard to see in the image, but it's just a little metal ramp that takes you up to a platform where people will be able to access the bus. So the bus doesn't need to actually pull into the curb. The curb actually comes out to meet the bus. So little things like that are a really cool example of some things that Washington, D.C. has been able to do that I have yet to see personally in Massachusetts. So being able to go and visit another city and then use a critical eye with the tools and the checklist was kind of the purpose of this mobile workshop. Alexis, yeah, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, even though the bike audit is new, the walk audit has been around for a few years, and I know for a fact that PVPC is using the walk audits for their Vision Zero planning. So
Awesome.
if you do keep in touch with us and possibly your MPOs, they can actually get used.
That's great. And PVPC is the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission for folks who are uninitiated. It's one of the metropolitan planning organizations that is utilizing this toolkit to analyze what could be better in their community that then could lead to projects or funding. So it's a very helpful and influential little tool. So please go ahead and make this happen. Yeah, and Tina, you're right. I think Western Avenue in Cambridge may have floating bus stops as well. Those are built into the curb, though. I think what I liked about this is that it's a temporary measure that is cheap. And that if they don't work, the city can remove it at not a lot of cost. So yeah, definitely appreciate that. Being able to travel and see what other municipalities have been able to do should be kind of inspiring and help the juices of advocates really kind of percolate up to some of the asks that we want to make. Cool. I'll pass it back to Emma for this part because she was our statewide coordinator to work with the league on how the asks went. And I should, before I do this, I'll preface by saying the asks as part of the Bike Summit are literally what we are going to our congressional offices and asking them to support. So this is directed by the League of American Bicyclists, but supported by MassBike and all the local advocates.
Great, thank you, Galen. So yeah, so we came prepared with one-pagers for the office staff of these asks, so they could read more up about it and when they present it to their representatives. So the first one was the Logging Camp Safety Act, and I have the House Representatives number 1668. And just for a little bit of background, Sarah Logging was a U.S. diplomat who was unfortunately struck on her bike by a vehicle, I think a truck, I believe, taking her little one to school. So it was really quite devastating. And this law gives state flexibility to help local governments pay for local projects by increasing that 20% mandated match from the federal highway funds. So 20% is the baseline, and we're just kind of pushing this law would push that to a little bit higher. The Complete Streets Act, which is number 7082 for the House and 3670 for the Senate, directs states to set aside a 5% of highway funding to create and implement a complete streets grant program for local projects. So as we know, Massachusetts is already doing this, but which was great, but the 5% is a little bit higher than the 2.5% of planning money. So this would be infrastructural money, and this would be for the whole, the whole progression of the project from start to finish, as well as review at the end. So, and we already had a lot of support specifically from Ed Markey on this. And then finally, the Bike Act, which actually doesn't have a number yet because it is very new. But this allows states to use highway safety funding for in-school bike education for elementary and secondary school students. So, as we know, we are doing bike education in Massachusetts through our Safe Routes to Schools program, but this would give them much more funding and much more resources to continue and create an actual curriculum that all schools can have access to.
Great, and thanks, Emma. So for those of you uninitiated with kind of the strata of where bike advocacy falls in the federal level, mostly it's dollars. A lot of the infrastructure and policies happen on the state and local level, but they're facilitated by funding that is unlocked from the feds. So we have the bipartisan infrastructure law, we have the Federal Highway Association, we have active transportation dollars. And so these asks were a little bit more in terms of how we are thinking of restructuring where dollars from, say, federal highway could go towards biking and walking. And that's really kind of how we were approaching this. But also we were meeting with the offices to talk about, well, what does biking mean to you? Because again, getting back to the Advocrats plenary session, we really did need to make it a personal human connection, which is why we loved going down to Lobby Day. I think this is my favorite slide of the whole presentation because it shows our delegation in force. Along with coming down for the workshops, we also were down there to meet, and we spent a whole day going between the House offices and the Senate offices and crisscrossing Capitol Hill, which was really lovely. And we had a very robust contingent representing almost every district, but we had folks from Concord and Lexington and Belmont and Natick and Boston and Brookline all coming down. On the right, you can see us that we paused for a powerful shot in front of the Capitol Dome. And on the left there is Senator Markey. For those of you unfamiliar, he is our senior senator. He also was the co-sponsor of the Complete Streets Act, has been pushing it for 2 sessions down there. He came down and addressed the bike lobby. He came down and spoke to the whole national bike lobby to say, I'm here to fight for you. This is my bill. I'm going to get this done. He always tells this really charming story of getting a bicycle for his 10th birthday, and whether the bike is blue or bike is red is not the point. The point is that he's going to get a bicycle for us. And I'll let him tell the story next time you get to meet him. But it is really heartwarming to kind of know that we have such a senior senator, such a senator who is in the storied halls of Congress down at our level and fighting for us. It's also really cool that he is modeling his national legislation, literally the Complete Streets Act, is based off of a Massachusetts policy that has been in place for about 9 years here in Massachusetts. For those of you unfamiliar with the state level of Complete Streets, more than happy to talk about this. Please get in touch with us. But the way it works is that a municipality can be receiving grant dollars, so free dollars, to do biking, walking, and transit projects if they've created a Complete Streets policy, and if they are analyzing their projects for biking, walking, and transit, which it's not a, well, we talk about carrot methods and stick methods. This is a carrot method. There's no punishment for not being a Complete Streets municipality, but there's a benefit because it unlocks dollars that the municipality would not otherwise have been eligible for. This is the same policy that is now being scaled up on a national level, and now state DOTs and local metropolitan planning organizations can create a Complete Streets policy that then makes them eligible for extra funding that can come from the Federal Highway Administration, which is part of where the Complete Streets Act, if it goes into an action, will be rolled into what's called the next Reauthorization Act, which is the big pot of money that will come from the federal government. So the cool part about going down there and having Senator Markey also meet with all of our constituents from across the state is to show that we are there in force. I also want to mention that it's super powerful to have representatives, not just in different communities, but representing different sides of bike advocacy. Jim in Lexington runs a bike shop. Laura is part of Mothers Out Front and works with the Safe Routes to Schools. Zoe is part of the National Youth Bike Summit. So she's representing kind of the next generation who's going to be taking the mantle, and so forth and so on. So we are each coming down with our own personal stories. Why is biking important for me? Why is biking important for Emma? Why is biking important for David and Zoe and Emma and Laura and all the rest, and Vivian? And by making it a personal story, we are really reaching the heartstrings of our congressional offices. We did get to meet a few reps personally, which is awesome, and always a joy to see Rep Presley. She's my own personal rep. I live in Alston, and we're there with David from JP and Vivian. That's that middle photo there. And then we're down with Rep McGovern, who is kind of the Worcester and Central Mass and a little bit of the Northampton, Western Mass as well. And Rep McGovern is a champion of unions, is a big champion of the farm bills. And we also got to highlight our Worcester e-bike program for the rep. He is super excited about what we're able to prove by offering discounts and grants to low-income residents to ride e-bikes and happening locally in his community. So we're able to come down with stories and tales of what we're doing in Massachusetts, share them directly with the power structure to really remind them that we are working diligently in Massachusetts and they've got our back. I will say, though, that most of the meetings were happening with staffers, which is totally cool because actually a lot of the work happens on the staff level. The reps are representatives, but the staff are the ones who are drafting the legislation, who are doing the real grunt work of going back and forth, who are connecting with the constituents. We had a breakout session with professional lobbyists at the summit, and somebody asked the question, what percentage of your meetings are actually with the reps? The answer is pretty much 0. Most lobbyists are meeting with staffers in order to get the legislation moving. So that top picture there is us and Rep Clark's. We are there meeting with Alex. He's the second from the left. Wonderful human being. He rides himself. I believe he's from Andover, if I'm remembering correctly. So he's talking about the trails and bike lanes in his hometown, how when he was a teenager, he would go riding, and then kind of the challenges that he was facing. So we always kind of come down with our stories why biking is important to us, but then we flip the script and say, hey, Alex, how is biking important to you in your community? What does biking mean for you? And the neat part about having the staffers, I will mention that typically they're younger. Typically, they're the ones doing a lot of the work, and they're arguably a little bit underpaid. But they're also living in an urban region that has a lot of bike infrastructure, has bike share, has transit. So they're understanding what it means to be multimodal, which is also really cool. So the power of kind of going down and meeting your congressional reps where they're working also is a way for you to get a sense of where their head is at, so you can know better how to talk to them. I want to do a quick caveat, though. In January, MassBike hosted a statewide lobby day where we asked you as advocates here in Massachusetts to meet with your own state rep and state senator. We also are asking you to meet in the district. So I fully imagine that not everybody listening to this can go down to DC to meet folks on the Hill, but every single congressional rep has a local district office that you can pop into. If you're in Rep Moulton's district, pop into their office in Salem and say hi. Meet them, talk to the staffer, understand where they're at, ask them how you can help from an advocate's perspective, and also ask them if they can help you. Is there a specific project that they want to be aware of? Is there a trail that you're working on? Really kind of build that bond. It's wonderful to meet with the reps themselves. I'm a big fan of Rep Presley. I remember her from her days as a councilwoman here in the city of Boston. She remembers us as on our advocacy. But really the real grunt work is happening at the staffer level. Cool. And we'll round out the presentation by mentioning two specific projects that are also happening on the federal level that you as advocates want to pay attention to. The first is the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. I know it's a mouthful. It's the ATIIP, or also known as ATIP. It's a very new funding mechanism that just got announced literally while we were there by the FHWA administrator, saying, hey, we're going to unlock $45 million specifically for active transportation. We're talking biking and walking. $45 million arguably is not that much money, but to have this earmarked, it's a start, it's a foothold, it's a step in the direction that they're going to take from arguably, it's a by name, a highway department. So we need to make sure that they're reframing the conversation with a new lens of where they're throwing their dollars and project support to. This is for you, whether you're an advocate, whether you're a regional organization, whether you're a municipal organization, you can apply for this funding. $45 million is available. They're looking at projects that might be around the $100,000 scope, but could be as low as, tens of thousands of dollars. But this is a funding opportunity that we are really hoping that Massachusetts local advocates, municipalities, and MPOs can really apply for and lock into. This is a brand new program, and if you're unfamiliar with some of the funding structures, please keep in touch with MassBike. We have a whole regional advocacy specialist who's tracking these funding structures, including Safe Streets for All, and other opportunities that are not fully programmed. And by that, I mean to say they haven't spent all their dollars. So we have the opportunity to ask for things that will help out biking, walking, creating safer roads for everybody. The applications for this are a quick turnaround. They're due on Monday, June 17th. If you have any questions, please check out the link that's here. We'll also link to this on our social media and on our website. But time is ticking now that the application portal is open. There will be webinars on this. There will be info sessions on this. Please, please, please take advantage of this. This is MassBike's ask to you to tap into. And then secondly, federally, what are known as earmarks, but also really called the community project funds, they are also open now as well. For those of you following what's going on in Washington, it's a bit of a mess. I will admit that the fact that the federal government is now voting on funding that should have been allocated last October is tough. But the House and the Senate just on Friday passed funding structures that will keep the government open And now we can talk about what are called appropriations, which are really just the dollars that come from the federal government. They are now flowing. Part of that are what are called community project funding, also known as appropriations, also known as earmarks. These are specific requests that congressmen people can make about projects in their district, whether it's a trail project, whether it's a bridge project, whether it's a set of intersection safety programs. If a project is ready, and by that I mean it's gone through a design process, it's gone through a community vetting process, and all it really needs is maybe a couple $100,000 or maybe $1 million to really get it moving. This is where you can make an ask to your congressperson to say, hey, can you kick the federal dollars to this project? It's how the government works, for better or worse, but it leapfrogs over a lot of the bureaucracy. This can be over the state requests, over the municipal planning organization requests, or the metropolitan planning organization request. This is specifically for a local group, a local municipality. If you've already got all of your ducks lined up and all of your cats herded to the point where you just need that dollar amount, the fiscal year 2025 appropriation process is now open. MassBike is collecting all the information of all 9 districts. We have 9 throughout the state. The goal here is that we want to make sure that you are asking hat in hand to get those federal dollars. Again, the real power of the federal government when it comes to stuff that we care about is giving you money. The work in terms of the advocacy happens on your level. So this is where the two sides can meet. Bring your advocacy directly to the congresspeople. Say, hey, we need this dollar amount. We've got the budget already figured out. If your project is in the process and you're not quite there, that's understandable. This happens every single year around early to mid-spring. They usually close these portals around mid-April. So MassBike is, over the next month or so, going to be sending this out on our social media and our blogs and our newsletter saying, hey, ask, ask, ask. But if your project's not ready, and we know that sometimes these projects take years or even decades to happen, that's okay. Don't feel rushed, but know that there are opportunities that generally happen around this time every single year. And part of our work at the National Bike Summit is to remind every single district that MassBike is a networker. We don't ask for these projects ourselves, but our job is to make sure that the advocates in the room know how to make that ask. So we're here to help you, but you're here to do the real work. So please keep in touch with us. The community project funding is a great way to get those local dollars, and nothing excites a congressperson more than getting dollars to projects in the district. So cool. So with that, I want to thank you for chiming in and hearing about what we did down there last week. It was a packed week. I want to thank all of our MassBike staff who were able to attend virtually for the sessions. I encourage anybody who's interested in coming down to DC to join Emma or myself or the rest of the staff. Please, 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 it is more than welcome to have you come and represent what biking means to you. Again, MassBike is there to facilitate, we're there to connect, we're there to coordinate, but we're asking you to come down and do the real advocacy. And it is an awesome opportunity to meet fellow advocates, to meet people in power, and to kind of get some of the best practices and principles, which are still going to be influencing us. And as we recap how it went, it's still very fresh in my mind and Emma's mind, I'm sure, but it does help MassBike and how we bring back to Massachusetts. And not for nothing, we're the #1 bike-friendly state in the country for a reason. So having more advocates represent that down there shows our strength in numbers. I do want to remind you that we're doing a lot coming up. We have Bike Month happening in May. We're doing a kickoff in Somerville on April 28th. Please stay tuned for that. All of May, we're going to have events across the state. And then locally here in Boston, we're also going to be doing the Kitty Knox ride on June 9th. But keep in touch with us. We have a whole bike-friendly calendar on our website at massbike.org.